The reason for this new era is because our effects on the Earth are so dominant, the most obvious one being regarding climate change. The essay for which I was granted the second place award, which I'm very, very grateful for, was called The Problem of Enlightenment Liberty in the Anthropocene. And what I was trying to, how our conception of liberty is actually quite detrimental to the ongoing crises under the unofficial era of the Anthropocene. To put it in a brief way for people who are not familiar with what the Anthropocene is, it is, again, an unofficial geological era. It is trying to really emphasize how this era is really human-dominated. In terms of the Earth systems and the geologic processes that determine pretty much all of the systems that have to do with the Earth. So we typically think of Earth history as being long-term. So when we think of like tectonic plates, like carbon cycles, water cycles, and so on. The reason for this new era, which has gained more acceptance among anthropologists and the humanities as opposed to geologists, is because our effects on the Earth are so dominant. They actually seem to take precedence and actually overwhelm natural processes. The most obvious one being regarding climate change. Obviously, climate change is the biggest issue here, but there are other issues. What I was trying to explore is the idea of Enlightenment liberty, and I was exploring the Lockean tradition because that is one of the most prominent and influential conceptions of liberty that has actually found its way into essential documents in Western nations, particularly in the Declaration of Independence of the U.S., as well as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in France. The idea that we sort of take for granted that, for example, we are at liberty to do what we want with property. The idea that, property is an inalienable right. The idea, for instance, that I should be able to drive my car whenever I feel like it. The fact that these impose high externalities on the Earth for which future generations will eventually have to bear the brunt of, does put into question whether we actually do have a right to the sort of Lockean idea of liberty and the sort of sacrosanct approach of life, liberty, and property that was put forth by John Locke. I end the essay by saying that we definitely need a reconceptualization of what liberty is, at least for the era in the Anthropocene, because what does it mean for me to be able to release tons and tons of CO2 that will eventually orphan a child 50 years down the line in a country like Bangladesh? And the fact that the global north are the biggest emitters, obviously, and the fact that they have caused the biggest damage, yet the people who will suffer the most are the people in the global south. It does sort of make one reassess, well, do I have a right to this sort of Lockean idea of life, liberty, and property? So I end the essay by saying that we should think of liberty not as the sort of inherent, inalienable right as Locke put forth, but as an emergent property, that your liberty doesn't just come from you being human. There are actually a lot of things that sort of contribute to you having certain liberties. For instance, we take it for granted that the climate is stable, and that sort of gives you the liberty that when you go driving down the road, that you won't face some catastrophic weather event. So the idea is that you would think of liberty as as sort of this emergent property, not as it being the sort of atomic and very individual property.